2. Rick was a werewolf. Scott was Frankenstein's monster, and Thad was some sort of cross between a mummy and a ghoul. Or at least, that was what they were going to be tomorrow. Having tried his costume on in the shop, Rick could now hardly wait for the Halloween carnival. His sour mood of an hour before had evaporated, and he was back to laughing and joking with his friends. They were crossing the town square to Harry Ho's, each of them carrying a bulging plastic bag emblazoned with the logo for Tozier's Costume Emporium, when Scott elbowed Rick in the ribs. "Hey, look out, guys," he muttered. "Here comes old Clayton." Rick looked up. Staggering towards them was an old man in a rumpled, food-stained suit and a grubby shirt. His grey hair was sticking up in knotty tufts on one side, as if he'd slept on it, and his sagging jowls were rough with several days' growth of white stubble. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, his nose as bulbous and purple as a plum. "Afternoon, boys," he called, raising his arm in a clumsy wave. Scott and Thad both sniggered, but Rick felt an ache of sorrow in his belly. Earl Clayton had once been the town's doctor. According to Mum, Dr. Clayton had brought not only Rick into the world, but Rick's dad too. He had been well respected in Blackwood Falls, and Rick himself remembered how kind he'd been when Rick had fallen off his bike 6 years ago and broken his collarbone. And then there had been the time when Grandma had died. Dr. Clayton had visited the old lady every night in the last month of her life, and had even come to the funeral. Now, though, he was a wreck of a man, and a lot of the local kids saw him as a figure of fun. He'd retired 4 years ago, and 2 months later his wife had died unexpectedly, which, according to Rick's dad, had knocked the stuffing out of the old guy. He had hit the bottle hard, and he now spent most of his time propping up the local bar, or sometimes even sitting on the bench in the town square, sipping whiskey from a bottle he kept in a brown paper bag in his jacket pocket. Many people had tried to help him, including Rick's mum and dad, but no one had been able to make him mend his ways. "You can't stop the man drinking," Rick's dad had said, short of sewing his lips together. "He's on a one-way path to destruction," Rick's mum had said, "and there ain't no one can do a thing about it." "Hey there, Dr. Clayton," Rick called now, kind of hoping that the old guy was too drunk to notice how Scott and Thad were laughing at him. Earl Clayton came to a swaying halt. He peered at Rick through the late afternoon gloom, screwing up his rheumy eyes. "Why, it's young Rick Pirelli, isn't it?" he slurred. "Yes, sir," said Rick loudly, trying to ignore a fresh outbreak of snickering from his friends. "My, but you getting tall," he said. "You boys going to the carnival tomorrow?" "Yes, sir, we'll be there," Rick said. "Well, you be sure to have fun, and don't forget to give my regards to your parents." "No, sir, I won't, and thank you, sir." The old man gave a clumsy salute, which Scott found so hilarious he had to clap a hand over his mouth to prevent himself hooting with laughter. "Quit it, you two," Rick muttered when the old guy was out of earshot. They crossed to Harry Ho's, ordered their ice creams and sodas, and sat down. Rick felt bad for Dr. Clayton, and so steered the conversation away from him and back to the topic of the week, Halloween. "Hey, what movies do you guys want to watch tomorrow?" "Saw," said Scott without hesitation. "Final Destination," said Thad. "There's no way my mum would let us watch either of those, and you know it. Come on, guys, get serious. We don't want everything we choose from the video store to get canned." They began to discuss the merits and demerits of certain movies, and were still arguing even after their ice cream bowls and drink cups were empty. They became so involved in a heated exchange about Psycho, Rick pushing for the original, Scott saying he'd rather see the colour remake, that none of them noticed the two strangers until a shadow fell over their table. They looked up to see a skinny guy in a tight suit grinning down at them. The guy was holding a banana split in one hand and a long-handled spoon in the other. He was shoveling ice cream into his smiling mouth as if he hadn't eaten in days. "Aren't bananas brilliant?" he said. The boys just stared at him. Finally, Rick said, "Who are you?" "I'm the doctor," said the man, "and I bet you're Rick." "How did you know that?" Rick asked. "Well, you look like a Rick. You're all kind of Rick-like. I knew a Rick once. Well, a Ricky. Well, a Mickey, really, except there were two of them, and one of them was called Ricky. But I didn't really get to know him all that well. Mickey, though, oh, brilliant he turned out to be. Prince among men. Top banana, which, funnily enough, brings us back to bananas again. Mind if I sit down?" The guy had spouted all this at breakneck speed. Rick felt as though he had been bombarded with words. What do you want?" he said. The doctor waggled his empty ice cream bowl. "Another one of these would go down a treat." He turned and yelled across the room. "Same again when you got a minute, Harry. Tar!" Turning to the girl beside him, who Rick now noticed was both beautiful and eating something chocolatey with caramel sauce, the doctor said, "What about you, Martha? Fancy another?" "I've barely started this one," she said. "Please yourself. Now, where were we? Oh, yeah. We're about to sit down." He grabbed a chair from the next table, swung it round and plonked himself into it. Then he jumped up again almost immediately. "Whoops, manners," he said, and offered the chair to the girl he'd called Martha. He grabbed another for himself, sat down, and leaned forward on his bony elbows, as if he and the boys were about to tell each other their deepest secrets. "So," he murmured, "dug up anything good lately?" The boys looked at each other in alarm. "Who did you say you were again?" asked Thad nervously. "He's the doctor, and I'm Martha," said the girl, and nodded at Thad and Scott. "So what do they call you two, then?" They told her. Rick said, "You say you're the doctor, so do you mean you're like the new doctor?" "Interesting question," said the doctor reflectively, and tilted himself so far back in his chair he looked in danger of toppling over. "I suppose that all depends, doesn't it?" "On what?" asked Scott. "On when you meet me. I mean, if you meet me in your past and my future, I'd be the new doctor to you, but the old doctor to me. Whereas if you meet the old me in your future, I'd be the new doctor now and the old doctor later. You see?" "Huh?" said Scott. The doctor lunged forward again, his chair crashing back down onto all four legs, making Scott jump. Staring at the boy intently, he said, "You haven't met the future me by any chance, have you?" No," whimpered Scott. "Or pity. I wanted to know whether I was ginger." Martha cleared her throat. "I think we're getting off the point," she said. "Quite right," said the doctor. "That's Rick, that is, trying to avoid answering the question." "What question?" said Rick. "You were about to tell us what you dug up." "Why should we tell you?" Scott blurted. "Because," said the doctor quietly, "if you don't, there's a very, very strong likelihood that you won't live to see your... How old are you?" 12, said Scott. "Okay," said the doctor, rotating his fingers in an anti-clockwise direction. "Your 13th birthday." "Hey!" exclaimed Rick. "Are you threatening us, mister? Because if you are..." "Calm down," Martha said, putting a hand on his arm. Despite his indignation, her touch gave Rick a warm, tingly feeling. "Of course he's not threatening you," she continued. "He's trying to warn you. He's trying to save your life." "Save my life?" said Rick. But why does my life need saving?" "Because that thing you dug up, whatever it is dangerous," said the doctor. "Very dangerous," added Martha. "Oh, yeah," the doctor agreed. "Very, very," and add another great big dollop of very with lashings of very on top. "But how do you know?" asked Thad. "I just do," said the doctor. "I'm clever like that." "Believe me, guys," said Martha, "you're doing yourselves no favours by keeping stum about this. We're probably the only two people who can help you." The boys looked at each other and her uncertainly. The doctor sighed and pointed out of the window. "That green mist," he said. "That's you, that is." They looked out of the window, and all three of them gasped. An eerie green mist was creeping into the town square. "What is it?" whispered Thad. "It came out of the hole you dug," said the doctor. "Whatever was in there was dormant, and now it isn't. It's very old and very deadly." Scott looked as though he was about to throw up. "It was only a book," he wailed. "At last," said the doctor. "A chink of daylight. Give that man a pineapple." "What sort of book?" Martha asked. "Dunno," said Rick. "It had weird words in it, like a foreign language or something." The doctor's second banana split arrived. He devoured it in 3 gulps. "Where's this book now?" he asked, spitting ice cream. "Under my bed," said Rick. The doctor jumped up so quickly that his chair fell over. "Show me," he said. Something strange was happening to the book underneath Rick's bed. It was beginning to quiver and twitch, like something coming back to life after a long, enforced sleep. The reddish-brown material which covered it rippled like slug flesh jabbed with a stick. Tiny sparks of green light began first to dance across it, and then to coalesce, to form a jagged, spidery network of strands, rather like a flickering green web. The web of light spread across the book around it, and within moments had enshrouded it completely. It glowed brighter, so brightly in fact, that soon the book no longer seemed like a book at all, but simply a block of dazzling green luminescence. It filled Rick's room, radiating out from under his bed, reflecting off the plastic models arranged on his shelves, bouncing back from the computer screen. Then it began to dwindle, to fade, and in less than a minute had vanished completely. And where the book had been, among the dust balls and dead spiders and discarded comic books, was suddenly nothing but an empty space.